All right, hello, and welcome to a webinar. Welcome everybody. Hello, friends. Come on in. I was just about getting started. Awesome. We're gonna wait until everybody gets connected on audio. Fabulous. Okay, well, welcome. Today, this is a webinar on a couple of topics that I've talked about before, a couple of things that I've maybe blogged on before, but really, two kind of F words that sort of trip us up, and then what can we actually do about it? So in the new kind of format, the webinars are going to be, 30 minutes full of content. And then next week, I'm following it up with kind of a live coaching call. So if you want to dig into any of this content, anything else, you can totally join us there. So let's go ahead and get started. When we talk about topics like fear and frustration, it's important that we really find kind of a good place before we start diving into them too deeply, because these can be things that really knock us off center or really cause a lot of question and doubt. So one of the ways I like to start when I'm working with this is something that I call thick memory recall. I learned this from a friend of mine in a coaching program. And essentially all it is just really getting deeply saturated in some memory that feels good. So whoever's joining today or whenever you're, maybe watching this, if you're watching it later, chances are you're kind of fitting this in among a bunch of other things. And to come in and say, I want to talk about fear and frustration, that can kind of pull up a lot for us. So just go ahead and we're just going to do it for 30 seconds. The original exercise I did it was for 3 minutes and it was beautiful. But just go ahead and close your eyes if you can and think of some awesome memory that you have. It can be from childhood, it could be from this morning, it could be from whenever. But just really with your eyes closed, get really into that memory. So just kind of look around, really remember what that felt like, recall who was there, all the details about it, just kind of what all was going on, and just let's sit in that really awesome memory just for a few seconds here. And I'm going to do the same just for a couple of seconds before we move on to the content of the webinar. So since this is recorded, it'll be weird if we're sitting there, silently for the whole entire time. I'm not going to spend too much more time on that, but take that as a tactic to help ground you. Anytime you're doing work with fear or frustration, that's a really good one to kind of get the playing field set, get you in a good place so that you can dive a little deeper. So let's talk about why we are talking about fear and frustration, like why these two out of anything that I could be talking about. And again, things that I've already kind of touched on in previous work. So a couple of reasons. Number one, these are very common, right? It's common for us to have fears. We don't always admit it. We don't always kind of want to say that it's out there, but we almost always have them, at least in some form or another. And frustration is common. And it seems to be something that with the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic is escalating for people. And there's a lot of neuroscience-based reasons why that's happening. But the truth is, like, frustration was around a lot longer before the pandemic, right? So driving, traveling, your internet goes down, you're texting with someone, they don't respond, like whatever it is, the dog goes to the bathroom on the floor, could be anything. So these are two very common things. Number two, they're also very sticky, what I would call sticky issues. Fear can be sticky, it's hard to get rid of. And frustration, especially when we develop patterns around how we deal with it, can become sticky and kind of hard to let go of, hard to move through. The other reason is because fear and frustration often masquerade as each other. So what we think is, well, I'm just frustrated by that, or I'm upset by that, or, that didn't feel good. What's actually going on is there's some deeper level fear that we're not listening to. The same thing for other people, what they might say is fear, or what we might say is a fear of ours. Perhaps it's just frustration with something that we're unhappy with in our day-to-day life. So is it really fear of failure, fear of success, fear of putting ourselves out there? Or is something else going on? So important to kind of get some distinction between the two. And lastly, I wanted to talk about fear and frustration because I like alliteration and I thought it sounded kind of cool. Okay, so similar to the last webinar in this fall 2021 series, I'm going to give you 3 strategies for dealing with fear and 4 strategies for dealing with frustration. So really kind of what do we actually do with this instead of just, how do we understand it a little bit differently? So number 1, is it fear or is it frustration? So how do we look internally and start to understand like, oof, what am I actually thinking? What am I actually feeling? What am I actually experiencing? So is it fear or frustration? So let's start on getting clear with that. Number 1, I want you to get calm and settled. Calm and settled, because oftentimes, especially with high achievers, which is the folks that I work with, and all of you that are watching this, no matter when you're watching it, you tend to be high achieving people, which means I'm going to tackle it and I'm going to do it right when it happens, and I'm going to dig in. What the problem is with that is that sometimes if we don't get calm and kind of settled first, doesn't mean that we get okay, doesn't mean we move into full acceptance, but that we get to kind of an even keel space to do some of that reflection. Absent doing that, it's not going to be as fruitful of a discovery process because it's not coming from really kind of your true centered. So get calm and settled. And then number 2, drop your judgment and what we call in coaching meaning making. So drop the judgment around the fact that you're even having to look at this. Drop the whatever meaning it is that you're putting on the fact that you lost it with, one of your kids at home or a family member, significant other, whoever it is, coworker. So drop that judgment in the meaning making. That doesn't really have space in this inquiry because we want to get really just to how you're feeling. So getting rid of some of those layers, allowing that to kind of live off to the side if you need it to. And then focus in on what am I feeling? So physically, what am I feeling in my body? What emotions am I feeling? What am I experiencing? Really kind of dig into that. Like, oh, I feel scared. I feel exhausted. I feel burned out. I feel kind of like oddly energized, ashamed, whatever it is. So start to just like kind of map out and inventory what I'm feeling. And then after that, move into what thoughts am I having? Because a lot of times we get so caught up in feeling the feeling that we forget to realize what thoughts we are thinking. And those thoughts are actually the things that are driving how we feel. So what am I feeling? Kind of do that inventory. What thoughts am I having? Ooh, I feel like I shouldn't have said that. That's a thought. The thought is making me feel ashamed, embarrassed, like I want to hide, whatever it is. So what thoughts am I having? And then double back on this question and say, what else am I feeling? And this is usually where you can start to differentiate. Is it frustration? Is it fear? What's really going on? So, like I'm mad. Okay, well, what else is going on there? Well, I realize I'm having the thought that, they don't care about me. When I have that thought, I get sad. When I think that they don't really care about me, I'm also, feeling afraid that I'll be alone. Okay, boom. Now we're starting to get some clarity. So calm and settled, drop the judgment and the meaning making. What am I feeling? What thoughts am I having? And then what else am I feeling? So kind of look behind that initial list for what else is going on. All right. If you struggle to get calm, like a lot of us do, myself included sometimes, consider leveraging your breath. Now, I've talked about breathing techniques in other webinars or whatever, but I want to reiterate this because a lot of you know this and still choose not to use it. And I was this way for years and years and years, really just up until the last couple of years, where I'm like, yeah, deep breathing, great, blah, blah, blah. The problem with shallow breathing, or what they sometimes call thoracic breathing or chest breathing, is that because it's shallow, it actually upsets your oxygen and your carbon dioxide levels. And what that will do is that's going to push you into stress response. So when you are stressed out already, or you're bumping into fear, frustration, your breathing gets shallow, or you're really busy, you're really distracted, and you're not like taking full deep breaths, your body is actually going to push you into stress. So you want to counteract that. Deep breathing, on the other side, is actually going to stimulate your parasympathetic nervous system, which is like responsible for keeping you calm. So it's going to regulate your heartbeat, your blood flow, your breathing, your digestion. For some of you who get tummy troubles when you get stressed out, deep breathing is actually going to help you regulate all of that. And that's what's going to keep you out of fight or flight. So if step one to dealing with fear and frustration is getting calm and settled, and you're struggling with that, try some of the deep breathing techniques as a way to kind of move past that, move into it. Okay, so I promised you a couple strategies around fear. So let's get into those. Number one is something called zooming out. And so this is a way to get perspective, not just on your immediate situation, but to give you a little bit of relief using a longer term look back. So the way I learned this technique is that you kind of come up over your current timeline. So what that means is if you think of your life in linear terms, so, birth, blah, 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 all these things, junior high, that was terrible for everybody, high school, maybe whatever we did after high school, all career progression, all up to current day, to this thing where you're sitting here afraid of something, you're noticing fear around something. And then you move up over the timeline, come up over the timeline as if you're floating down, looking down at yourself, and you move forward to 15 minutes after the thing. So whatever it is that you're afraid of, now imagine yourself placed 15 minutes after it's over. The conversation you don't want to have, the, conflict, the interaction you don't want to have, the meeting you don't want to go to, the flight you don't want to take, whatever it is. Move to forward to 15 minutes after it's done, and then look back. So imagine yourself as your future self, 15 minutes past it, and you're now looking back to where you are currently standing with this kind of whatever it is that you're afraid of, and then just notice how you're feeling. Notice how you're feeling. Every time I have done this, and it's been plenty, believe me, I picture myself 15 minutes past the thing, I look back and I feel relief. I always feel relief. And what that helps me do is it helps me reframe, if not the actual event itself, the act of getting past the event. And then that becomes something positive that I can look forward to. Sometimes if you look back and there's a different feeling, like if you were to experience like regret or, anything other than kind of relief or something that feels good, pop back into, is this really something I want to do? Because that might be an indicator that you're about to take an action that's really not in alignment with who you are. Now, sometimes you have to do those things like the presentation, the interview, the whatever. So focus on that feeling of relief and let that be sort of a guide for you moving forward. Okay, second strategy around fear is to knock the F out of it. So if you take the F out of fear, it's ear, which I actually really like because I think fear has a lot to teach us. And so one of the strategies for dealing with it is to knock the F out of it, meaning what is it trying to tell me and what is there for me to learn? So how can I actually, instead of pushing back against fear, instead learn from it? So if I'm afraid to have that conversation, what is there for me to learn here? I need different techniques, tactics. I don't trust that person. And so I need assistance with the conversation. I'm not as prepared as I want to be. I just don't like conflict. How can I do some work around that? I'm afraid of this, whatever. Okay, what's my thought around that? And then we can start to work the thought once you know what that is that's causing that feeling of fear. So knock the F out of it, which means actually using your ear to listen to it. And then lastly, this is one I bumped into recently, actually with the relaunch of my website, was this kind of idea of scared intention versus sacred intention. So I'm not going to get religious on you here, but the juxtaposition of just moving the A and the C in those two words, scared and sacred. When we come at something with a fear-based intention, we are going to experience more fear around it. When we come to it with what I would call a more sacred or aligned intention, something that's more aligned with who we are, that is a fast track to getting more of that around it. So make sure that whatever your intention is for this is something that would fall in that kind of sacred category, not the scared. So if you're afraid of giving that presentation at work in a couple of weeks, your intention is not, oh, I hope I don't puke on my own shoes. That's a scared intention. The intention is, I want to do a really great job delivering this message. That's a sacred intention. So watching where you're kind of using those and making sure you're staying in that sacred kind of bucket. Okay, so let's move over and talk about frustration for a couple minutes. Then I'm going to wrap up with an exercise at the end for everybody. So frustration happens sometimes when we know it's likely to happen. And then there's places where we're like, whoa, where did that come from? So let's talk about when you know it's likely to happen. Number one, build awareness of those situations that are likely to trigger your frustration. So getting the kids out of the house in the morning, trying to get your partner to do their fair share of the cleaning, employee, there's a quarterly meeting that you have to go to that is always full of complaints, getting stuck in traffic, whatever it is, build awareness of those situations, because that awareness is the first step to overcoming really anything. Is like, hey, I know this usually makes me feel frustrated. Okay, cool. Now, before I go into that, I'm going to get anchored ahead of time. So this doesn't have to mean, 30 minutes chanting with incense and crystals in a dark room. This just means that you've done something to get anchored before you get into that situation. So before I even remotely attempt to try and get my 3-year-old out of the house in the morning, I make sure that I stop for a minute, I close my eyes, and I take at least one deep breath, because I know it's likely that I will run into some frustrations in that next 30 to 45 minute time period. Same thing. I get in the car. I know I'm going to be stuck in traffic. I take a minute. I get myself set. I maybe put a podcast on, do something else, but you get anchored ahead of time. Number two, have some way to stay anchored during that experience as much as you can. That's a power phrase or a mantra. We've talked for like little rituals that will reset us. I have the client that like claps her hands and then shakes them out. Anything you can do during to help you kind of stay anchored. And then to have an out ready ahead of time. So if it really gets overwhelming, what is your path out of it? But don't try and figure that out on the fly when you're in the midst of the situation. You're not gonna be successful doing that. You're not gonna have enough time to kind of figure it out, presence to figure it out. So have some sort of out ready. In a situation like trying to get your 3-year-old out of the house when you can't really get out of it, plan on some sort of thing that you can say or do. Walk away for 7 seconds, take a breath, bend over, touch your toes, whatever it is, come back in, but have some sort of out ready ahead of time. Same goes for other meetings, anything like that. Traffic's a little bit different because you might, need to actually get to somewhere on certain time, but you could call a friend, hands-free, of course, because of laws, but have something that would help you ahead of time. And then lastly, create a recovery plan. A lot of people skip this step. And I did for a long time. And this has been the fastest way to move me out of frustration and back into productivity mode, is actually having some sort of recovery plan afterwards. Your next strategy around frustration, especially when you know it's likely to happen, debrief it. Take notes like a scientist and ask yourself, what could you learn from this experience? Like, what is there to actually learn from that experience? You'll hear me say that a lot, but it's because we don't do a lot of this self-examination. And the more that we do, then we find, oh, I could do this differently. Oh, here's a different way to approach that next time. All right, so let's switch over and talk about frustration when you're caught off guard. When you're caught off guard, like things are going fine, and then all of a sudden, whoa, I left my wallet on the back of the car. Again, if you're me, it's happened more than once. What do we do? Okay, number one, we need a triage, right? So there's an immediate sort of set of actions that we need to have in hand. Number one, what helps you step out of frustration? Is it deep breathing? Is it stretching? Is it calling someone, sending an angry text message? Do you need to have a number 2 pencil on hand that you can break in half? Whatever it is, but have something that helps you sort of step out of the immediate feeling of that frustration. And again, remember that 90-second flush that I've talked about before, Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor. There's a 90-second chemical flush that we have associated with feelings. So I feel frustrated. Can I distract myself for 90 seconds, let that move through, and then I'll be in a more objective place to handle it. Number 2, try naming it. This is from acceptance and commitment therapy. Try naming it. I'm feeling frustrated. I'm feeling frustrated. Sometimes the simple act of that is like, okay, I am. Now what do I want to do with it? And then number 3, do what it takes to move into objectivity. And that's going to look a little different for everybody else. Sometimes I like to imagine my frustration as some sort of like object or animal, but I can see it, I can hold it in my hand, or I can put it on a desk and then I can sit there and glare at it. But all I know is that I'm now outside of it. I'm no longer in it, totally feeling it. So that helps me move into objectivity. Other people, you might want to have a frustration buddy if this is a significant thing for you, who's a safe space that you can, lean on. You may have a series of questions that are sort of like in a notes app on your phone and say, okay, if I'm feeling frustrated, and then write yourself some questions to kind of ask to help you step out of the immediacy of the experience and into a place where you're sort of observing it. Once you've gotten to that place, that's where you want to give it a little bit of space and quit resisting it. Because a lot of you will fall into this trap of, I got frustrated. God, I can't believe I'm frustrated again. Wow, I thought I had better coping mechanisms, blah, blah, blah. And then you're berating yourself. And now you have this like crazy maelstrom going on of like, whoa, what is actually happening here? So give it a little bit of space, acknowledge your frustration, acknowledge the event or the thing that created that frustration in the first place, and then see if you can move into a place of acceptance or allowance. So doesn't mean we like it, doesn't mean it feels good, but can I either accept it or at the very least allow for it to be? I can't control this, I'm just going to allow for it to be. That one says easy does hard. That takes a lot of practice, at least for me. And then next, again, you're seeing a common theme here, interviewing and investigating it. What does your frustration show you? What's behind the frustration? So how can we go a little bit deeper with that? So, what does your frustration show you? I have a client who was just getting super frustrated at work with her boss. Boss is sort of near retirement. She's like, what is going on? This lady's not helping. She's taking all this time off. She's not responding. She's working from home every single day instead of coming into the office like she should be. Really difficult situation. And so as I asked, what is your frustration showing you? Like, what's it showing you? The initial start is, well, that she's irresponsible or she's unreliable or blah, blah, blah. Well, what we got down to was your frustration is showing you that you're feeling really overworked and you're spending a lot more hours there than you actually want to be, than actually feels good for what your life looks like and kind of what your family situation will support. So with that knowledge, then we can tackle the problem of overwork, working hours, work-life integration. How do we move through that? So really using that frustration as a place to show you what you might need. In my personal life, personal example, when we are putting my daughter to bed, it is absolutely horrific. And so she's got baby FOMO like you would not believe and wants to stay up super late. So bedtime takes forever and it can be really frustrating. It's a really big drain. When I walked into this conversation in my own head about what is my frustration showing me, one of the things it was showing me is that I am not getting enough one-on-one time with my partner, because part of the reason I'm getting so frustrated is that it's draining time from that I used to be able to have with my partner. So again, how can you let your frustration be a little bit of a guide to teach you something else about what you actually need? Because the frustration usually is happening not just in response to the immediate thing, but it's also with all these other outside factors kind of creeping into that. So that's what the bedtime example is. And then once you get behind it, go deeper. How do you actually, what do you actually do with that? So this is also where I would recommend doing some field research. So anytime we bump into frustration, sort of after the fact of it, we know there was something that frustrated us. Ask yourself 3 questions. Number 1, is it random? Was it just like some jerk on the, freeway? Okay, that's one thing. Are there patterns though? Is there something where there's something in the routine, or you notice, man, every other week this is going on, or every time this thing happens, there's some sort of pattern of frustration for me? And then can you identify any triggers? Is there anything in there that you're like, wow, when I don't sleep well, everything is frustrating? Or when this person does this certain thing, man, that just sets me off, and everything after that is frustrating. So you want to kind of look for these, because there may be environmental things that you can control simply by learning a little bit about what's happening when you have been frustrated. So we kind of talked about what to do before it happens, what do we do when it happens, and this is now like kind of it happened. Now what else can I learn? Um, I'm really big on eliminating small annoyances because they will escalate into bigger frustrations. So anywhere you can find things like that, where it's like, ugh, that thing is so annoying. My pantry was a great example. Disorganized, couldn't find a right way to do it. Holy cow, every time I reached in there for something, there was like one box that would also get knocked off that I would either have to move or like pick up because I knocked it off again. I moved the box. Seems simple, but ask me how many months that stupid thing was in the way, where I was knocking it off every time and being like, oh, moderately frustrated. Same thing. We had a coffee pot that dripped. Not majorly, but enough. And so every morning you'd pour your coffee and like, oh, you'd have to wipe it up off the counter. And I told myself I was being frugal, but really I was just being kind of complacent about dealing with that. But it was one little frustration that I could eliminate. So the trigger, I realized, was every time that would drip, I'd be kind of angry that I had to go get the dish towel and wipe it up off the counter. So see where you can have some influence there. And then lastly, as you dig into what's behind your frustration, especially, feed the need, listen to it, move the box, get a different coffee pot, move the, whatever the thing is that's causing that frustration, and just see if you can feed that need. If it's more time by yourself, give yourself that micro experiences of it, whatever it is, but actually take action with it. Okay, so I wanted to wrap up today actually with an experience to let you kind of dig into your frustration, especially because I really think that's the best starting point for this kind of conversation. So go ahead, and if you're in a spot where you can close your eyes, go ahead and close your eyes. If you're not, just kind of like let your attention focus low to wherever your coworkers aren't going to be, wondering if you fell asleep at your desk. But go ahead and close your eyes and really get settled in. And while you do that, remember that deep breathing, take a couple breaths if you want. If you were trying to email and listen to this and text and whatever, maybe just set it aside. This is going to take 2 minutes maximum. So we can carve out 2 minutes in a 30-minute time frame you already have blocked off for this. Go ahead and close your eyes, get settled. And then I want you to call to mind the last time that you were really frustrated. So when was the last time that you were really frustrated about something? And I want you to just kind of like let yourself feel that physically, emotionally, like, ugh, what is going on there? And then start to ask, what else is happening in there? So aside from those initial feelings, what else is going on in there? What else are you feeling? And just sort of notice that. So again, dropping that judgment, making that space for it. What else is going on in there? And then if you'd like to try a visualization, go ahead and visualize your frustration as some sort of large object or item or being, whatever it is. If that doesn't work for you, visualize it as a really big word, a really big word. So visualize that frustration as some sort of object. But then notice if there's any other objects present around it. So are there other, if it's a big block, are there other littler blocks around it? If it's a wall, are there other bricks to it? Is there barbed wire layered on top of it? Whatever it is. And just kind of notice what else is there. And then we're going to dig in and just acknowledge the frustration and anything else that's showing up for you. And just ask, what are you trying to tell me? So I'm going to say that again, and I want you to ask your frustration, and then I'm going to be quiet for 10, 15 seconds. Ask your frustration or any other feelings. What are you trying to tell me? And so as you listen, whether it's now or you revisit that, just watch and kind of notice if that frustration lessens in intensity at all, gets smaller, changes in any way, and just pay attention to that, because it's oftentimes really good clues that we can pick up kind of from our more intuitive state about what we actually need, what would help us. And then lastly, again, feed that need. What are the action steps that you want to take? So go ahead and come out of that exercise if you haven't already. But just know that whatever level to which that works or doesn't work for you, number one, you can get the steps. They're up on the screen right here. You can screenshot, it'll be available in the recording. But the most important part is kind of taking that minute to tune in and find out what else is there for you. So with that, that's the end of the webinar. Please go be good to yourselves, however you can incorporate that in some small way today. As you bump into fear and frustration, remember these tactics about how to work with it and kind of partner with those, learn from them, do your field research, and then let that, instead of being something that bogs you down, instead become a springboard for what is possible for you. As always, if I can support you in any way, you feel free to reach out to me and I will be happy to do so. Wishing everybody a fantastic rest of the day. Take care.